was a trading force, to becoming an occupying force. Okay, so that was an important event that took place. Okay, and that event, okay, resulted in the occupation of India. So so what did the British do? The British were very clever. They said, wow, we got to control all these darkies, right? Because remember, the caste system was going away. So how do we bring them back to heel? What do you think they did? Any thoughts? What they did was they said, wow, there was this thing called the caste system. So they go and find the pre-8th century draconian Brahmanical Hindu laws, and they bring in those Brahmin priests, and they recodify those laws. And this is, by the way, in a great book by a guy called Ramakrishna Mukherjee, in a book called The Rise and Fall of the East India Company. It's a very hard book to get. But anyway, they essentially, instead of imposing British law on the Indian people, they imposed Indian law on the Indian people. But not 17th century Indian law or 18th century. They went and found pre-8th century Indian law. Okay? So imagine the United States going back, not to the 17th century, but they go back, 800 years. Got it? To medieval times. So they bring that law back in India, which was the caste system. Okay, you're a coconut picker, you should be a coconut picker. Frank, you're an electrician, you should be an electrician. John, you're a videographer, you should be a videographer, and so should be your sons. So they brought everyone back to heel. They created this draconian caste infrastructure. This makes sense? So the British reimposed the caste system, and most Indians don't know about this. And step by step by step, they bring the entrepreneurial, the vibrant Indians who are breaking from the caste system back to heel. All right? So that's what takes place. So by the late 1800s, so now what's happening in happening in India is, the British do something very clever. You know those same Brahmins who were the priesthood? Okay? They put them in key positions in India to be the civil servants of India, to be the bureaucrats controlling other Indians. Okay? So it's not white men control the brown people, but they get other brown people who they claim are the upper caste to control the other people. Okay? So they created this Indian civil service infrastructure in India called the Indian Administrative Service, still in existence today, called the IAS. And even today, it's a prestigious job if you become a member of the IAS. It's like becoming a member of the bureaucracy of the swamp in Washington. Okay? So the British created the Brahmanical IAS in India over 1700s, 1800s, and by the 1900s. Well, guess what happens in the 1900s? So the British have set up their brown infrastructure to manipulate and suppress the other hundreds of millions of brown people. But in the 1800s and 1900s, as I've talked about, revolution was in the air. In America in 1886, Haymarket takes place in Chicago, where working people start fighting. Women start fighting for suffrage in the 1900s. The Russian Bolshevik Revolution is taking place. All over Britain, the elites are being threatened. So the early 1900s were a revolutionary period in world history. Revolution was in the air. And that revolution meant, in India too, in the early 1900s, the darkies were rising up. Dark matter rises, okay? And these brown folks were saying, what the F is going on here? That we have the British. They're using the same caste system to suppress us. We want a revolution. We want a revolution like America. They were quoting Thomas Paine. And they said, if America could kick out the British, why don't we kick out the British? So revolutionaries start rising up, real revolutionaries, okay? People like Tilak and Aurobindo and all these people's names which have been completely written out of history, which has been controlled by the British. People like Bhagat Singh, okay? The Malcolm X of India, okay? These people start rising up. And there is a revolutionary movement brewing in India in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And the British are observing this, the Indian elites are observing this, and they're scared shitless. Okay? So that's the second piece I want to talk about, is that what I just talked about is that second piece. So, first piece, Indian caste system existed. the Indian caste system was going away, the British reinstituted it, and then third, this revolutionary movement is growing in India in the early 1900s. In the middle of this movement, you have this so the British are saying, shit, what do we do? Okay? What do we do? Because they had billions invested in India. The Indian elite also were heavily invested in India. One of the little things I want to bring up here is these are three big Indian companies. Some of you may have heard of. Let me just bring an image here. These are three companies called Tata, Birla, and Bajaj. Okay, some of you may see this. Tata is this big company, Birla Group, and Bajaj. These guys do motorcycles today. Birla does all sorts of textiles. Tata owns a lot of automotive, etc. So why am I bringing that up? The Tatas, the Birlas, and Bajaj were families. During colonial times, okay, they were the bootlickers of India. They sucked British Empire, whatever you want to call it, bohunkus, okay? And the British rewarded them handsomely. They gave them land, they gave them favors, they gave them massive contracts, okay? And there were others, but these three, today they are mega corporations in India. But they started with immense back-end support from the British. Well, those three people, guess what? They were agents of the British. They're the ones who propped up Gandhi. So just remember, revolutionary movement is taking place in India. Indians want a revolution. And then there is this freaking character called Mahatma, which means a great one, bullshit branding. And you have to understand this, the elites are very clever. His name was Mohandas K. Gandhi. Overnight his name is changed to Mahatma Gandhi. Like the Christ. That's what they changed his name to. Branding, branding, branding. Okay? So, who is Gandhi? Well, Gandhi is a two-bit lawyer in South Africa who is essentially a racist. So in South Africa, so Gandhi's, his early part of his career was as a lawyer in South Africa. Well, so it is, if you watch this very, very propaganda movie, Gandhi, they promote him as though he was fighting for blacks and brown people in South Africa. You've seen that, right? Go see the movie. And by the way, when that movie was created with Ben Kingsley and Martin Sheen, it was at a time when people in India had enough of Gandhi. So right when that happens, the British elites create another movie to prop up Gandhi. Well, if you go read that Gandhi, what you'll find out is that Gandhi in South Africa was first of all not at all fighting for the rights of poor blacks. You know, remember, South Africa's 3% whites, massive racism. He actually wants to get trading rights for the wealthy Hindus in the Transvaal region. That's what he was fighting for. He wasn't really fighting for freedom. Number two, in South Africa, he supported the Boer, he supported the British in the Boer War against the Afrikaans. He supported the British against the Zulus. Okay? And he also was convincing the British that the Indians in South Africa, the elites, were Brahmins and they were Aryans. And definitely the British should support the Brahmin Indians because the Africans were savages. And you can go read all this. He was a freaking racist scumbag. Is that as undiplomatic as I can get? But that's what he was. Gandhi was a racist scumbag. And in South Africa, you know, he was actually funded, one of his ashrams in South Africa was funded by Tatas, one of the group side. The big mega corporations funded by the British funded him in South Africa. Okay? So he's basically being propped up. He's a racist in South Africa. He thinks the Africans are savages. He is not helping the poor Hindus in South Africa or the working class. He's helping the elite Indians. So please get that very clearly. Now, when he comes to India, he's transported into India to really support this movement. Well, who supports his movement in India? Okay? The people that support his movement in India are the Birla Group. They're the ones who fund his projects in India. Tatas and the Bajaj people give him land. How did this guy who comes out of nowhere get all the support? He had funding. He had massive amount of capital from the Tatas, Birlas, and the Bajajas. So you see how the British worked? They use these proxies who were already their bootlickers to fund Gandhi, okay? So the Tatas funded him, the Birlas funded him, okay? As well as the Bajaj Group. All those three logos I just brought up. And you can go do your own research on this. But fundamentally, Gandhi was backed by mega corporations who were bootlickers of the British. He was a British agent. Wouldn't you say so, John?
Yeah.
Frank, what would you say?
Sounds that way.
Yeah. Okay. Now you won't see this in the movie Gandhi. You won't see this there. You won't see any Hollywood people talking about this. You won't see the Kennedys talking about this. But this is a reality. Okay. So now you see what they did. They found their character. They created their actor. And then they changed his name to Mahatma K. Gandhi. Okay? Subra Mazumdar. This is great. Put him up there, John. We have a fellow Indian who says, Gandhi pin, Hindus should not harbor anger in their hearts against Muslims, even if the latter want to destroy them, even if the Muslims want to kill us. We all should face death bravely. Okay? So anyway, thank you, Subra. But Subra is basically saying that Gandhi basically practiced divide and rule. Okay? But one of the most important things that Gandhi did was he put forward the caste system again. In fact, there was a true leader of India called Ambedkar. Ambedkar was like the Malcolm X of India who was against the caste system. And Gandhi in his debates with Ambedkar said, you know, Hinduism won't survive without the caste system. And Gandhi would talk about this old guild shit, you know, like we need the guild system. Always these apologists do that. So Gandhi, let me be very clear, was a casteist. He was not into freedom-loving. He believed in this hierarchical system. He was not about peace, love, and understanding. Now, let's talk about Gandhi is promoted as this great man who was a non-violent human being, right? How many people believe that? How many of you believe Gandhi, non-violence, show the other cheek, all this bullshit, okay? Well, first of all, let me give you a very important fact. In 1931, when a peaceful demonstration took place in Peshawar, okay, where Indians were protesting, okay, against British colonialism, against the British atrocities. So here Indians are protesting, and the British asked the troops to shoot in a peaceful demonstration. Remember, most of the British Army was made up of Indians called sepoys, S-E-P-O-Y-S. Guess what? The Indians say, no way, we're not shooting these peaceful protesters. You know what Gandhi's response to that was? Gandhi said, this is wrong. When people are told by their authority to follow orders, they should follow orders. They should have shot at those people. Let me repeat that again. This was the kind of guy Gandhi was. He was a feudal scumbag, okay? People are having a peaceful protest. The British order their troops, which are Indian sepoys, to shoot. They don't shoot, and Gandhi says they were being disloyal to their authority. Okay? And you can go study this. And by the way, there was an interview in Le Monde in a French newspaper about this, if you want to go do the research. Fact. All right. Was Gandhi against war? Was he against war? Was he against war? Let's talk about that. Well, Gandhi actively recruited Indians to go fight in World War I. Okay? Remember the video I did. World War I was an imperial war started by the British to crush Germany, to reinforce the racist concept of Cecil Rhodes, that no other country should ever challenge Britain. Gandhi recruited people for World War I and World War II. And by the way, he was given a medal for this, okay? Gandhi got a medal for recruiting people for World War I. Does that sound like a nonviolent person?
Sounds like a warmonger.
He's a warmonger. He was a scumbag. And remember, all of this is occurring, it's not occurring at a time when Indians were wanting to kiss ass to the British. This was at a time when the broad mass of Indians wanted a revolutionary war like America had. They wanted to kick out the British. They wanted a revolution by any means necessary that was according to their national sovereign rights. All right? So, what they ended up using Gandhi, and Gandhi was a willing subject. So, now India, what they do with Gandhi, and this is what you need to understand in our Not So Obvious Establishment series. What the Not So Obvious Establishment does is always divert people into the legislator. Someone just wrote me that, when we do protests, what do, John? We take to the streets. We don't have protests going to legislators. In this anti-jab movement, the scumbag Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who never wanted to do protests, who attacked me for doing protests in New Jersey, which is how we won, is now suddenly trying to hijack the movement. And he's trying to do protests, but he's telling people to go beg to the legislators. That's not what a true workers' movement is. So Gandhi did the same thing. He's the father of the Not So Obvious Establishment. So what they did in India was they created the Indian National Congress, like a parliament for the Indians. They don't want people on the streets building their own movements. They want people in nice little plush offices talking and thinking they're better than everyone, becoming parliamentarians and legislators. So they created the Indian legislature called the Indian National Congress. It's called the safety valve technique of the elites. So they said, look, let's all talk. Let's all debate. And remember, this is now going backward. There's already a revolutionary movement created. So the British, at the blessings of Gandhi, their agent, create the Indian National Congress. Now they can bring the quote-unquote left and right together, and they can watch how they fight against each other. Okay?
Just to pacify the people.
To pacify the people. Thanks, Frank. It's a safety valve. Let out the steam. Calm down the masses. And then they take some of these Indian elite Brahmins. One of them was called Nehru, Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. Nehru was a complete, Anglophile suck-ass to the British Empire. So the last British emperor was known as a guy called Lord Mountbatten. Mountbatten. Lord Mountbatten's wife was a woman called Edwina. Okay? Nehru, who was supposedly the leader of India, was banging Mountbatten's wife. Get that? That's how much of an enemy he really was against the British. Well, Gandhi promotes Nehru to be the next Prime Minister of India. He was in the arms of the British, everyone. And Nehru becomes the next Prime Minister. In fact, in 1947, when this transfer of power takes place from the British elites to the Indian elites, guess what the document is called? Is it called the Declaration of Independence? No, it's called the transfer of power. That's what the document is called. Okay? It is called the transfer of power. Think about that. The elites are so blatant, just like they are today. Look at how blatant the elites are. And people still want to suck ass to Trump. They still want to suck ass to the Kennedys. They're very blatant. So they call the document the Indian Transfer of Power. And the Indian Transfer of Power basically says we're going to transfer power from the British monarchy to the Indian monarchy, anointed by Gandhi. So Jawaharlal Nehru becomes the first Prime Minister of India, anointed by Gandhi and the British. Now you would think this is supposed to be democracy. Well, 10, 20 years later, his daughter becomes the next Prime Minister. And guess who becomes the next Prime Minister after that? His son, her son. And then guess who becomes the head of the Congress Party running India? Her daughter-in-law.
It's a monarchy.
It's a fucking monarchy. And now they have a son running. Okay? So, Gandhi, for 70 years, transferred power. He's a not-so-obvious establishment. He's the pimp who sold India. Abhishek says, can you share all your sources on this topic? Any other sources you find important on the history of India and Hinduism? Sure, Abhishek. Abhishek, number one, you should go read the book. By the way, there's one copy of this in the Widener Library called The Rise and Fall of the East India Company. Rise and Fall of the East India Company. Number one book. Number two book is you should go study the debate between Ambedkar and Gandhi. Number three, go look at, you can just go look at it, South Africa, Gandhi, Zulus. Go look at South Africa, Gandhi, Transvaal. And you do your own research. But the point is, the facts are actually quite obvious. The question we have to ask